Tim Ferriss is a fraud. Okay, that statement comes off a little strong. And while I'm not the first to say it, I've actually met Tim Ferriss a few times, and I truly think he's a good, genuine, and intelligent person at heart. But this isn't a gossip channel, it's an educational channel. And what I want to talk about isn't actually Tim Ferriss, it's his central ideas, because I believe they're misleading and often doing more harm than good. Many of you in the movement community might not know who Tim Ferriss is, and that's fine. Basically, he was a Princeton grad and tech entrepreneur that started a supplement company. He was working 80-hour work weeks until he decided to put some systems in place for other people to run his company while he traveled the world for 6 months. He comes back and voila, his company is doing better than ever. One thing not many people recognize about Tim is that he's a genius of marketing. So he writes a book filled with a mix of incredible wisdom and cheap hacks, uses some clever A/B testing with fake websites, and decides to name his book The 4-Hour Workweek, which goes on to become a #1 New York Times bestseller. Then writes The 4-Hour Body and 4-Hour Chef. He starts his own TV show, which fails. Then he starts a podcast, which becomes widely successful. Now, importantly, I'm not out to debunk the 4-Hour Workweek in particular, nor even to claim that it isn't a good book. However, what I am after is his central idea, which has appealed to many, including my past self, that you should work smarter, not harder. So convincing is Tim's rhetoric surrounding this idea that I myself fell for it for years, until I realized the hard way that it is not so. There are 4 important points that I want to make. First, asymmetry of results. Most things in modernity are winner take all. This is something Nassim Taleb talks about. For instance, musicians. Almost no one buys or listens to music from local artists anymore. The vast majority listen to music from the best, the top 1% or even less. So you can do your 80-20 all you want, but 80% as good as Snoop Dogg means that you're not even in the real contest. Why would anyone listen to someone who's significantly and noticeably worse than Snoop when you can just listen to Snoop himself? Or in business, imagine if Android phones were always 20% worse than Apple. They would be out of existence in no time flat. So 20% of the effort doesn't always get you 80%. Sometimes it gets you just 1% of the result, or even less, which would be a 20x worse return on investment, which puts you out of business and gets you exactly 0% of the result. Now, if you're smart, some of you might be thinking that's an unfair argument because I made up those numbers myself. And I did, so it is. Here's some real numbers. Think of all the people you grew up with who have been musicians. Now think who was the best. They were probably very good, and if they're lucky enough to have been able to go professional in the US, then they would have an average salary of $47,000. In 2021, just the 10th highest paid musician made $80 million. Those Taylor Swift level artists may only be about 20% better as an actual musician than your friend, because diminishing returns. But your friend didn't get 1% of the return of Taylor Swift. They got just 0.05% of the return. As in, Taylor Swift made more money in 1 week than your friend will make in 32 years. That is the asymmetry of results that comes with working against and rising above the point of diminishing returns. Fighting against diminishing returns is certainly not for everyone, but those who do and those who don't should know the risks and rewards. Secondly, and perhaps by far the most important, work leads to growth. Applying the 80-20 rule wantonly is a recipe for stagnation and degradation. Most of what you get from putting in the extra effort isn't results in the present, and certainly not the past, but learning and growth that pays dividends in the future. Imagine you're pushing a cruise ship. It takes a lot of effort to push and get it going. And if you stop pushing, you probably won't notice anything for quite a while. But if you stop pushing, or you start pushing 80% less, a year or 2 goes by and you start to notice you haven't really moved anywhere. Or if you're pushing really hard and you keep pushing as hard as you can for a long time, in the present you won't notice, but in the future you'll start to see that cruise ship starts to move. Third, competitiveness and exposure. In anything competitive, re worthwhile, everyone at the top is going to be looking for ways to work smarter. And they'll be working hard as well. How smart you work is just a multiplier of the amount of work you do. Just trying to work smarter is asking to get left in the dust. Fourth, and often completely ignored, working smart requires better operating paradigms. and these require work to obtain and work to test. Now, I want to ask you a very generalized and inflammatory statement. Prepare for cancel culture in 3, 2, 1. Why are nerds not good at sports? It's certainly not because movement isn't intellectually complex. And indeed, in most sports, technique is limiting, if not entirely controlling of the result. Indeed, in grappling, I've watched my instructor, Kyotera, who's of similar build to me, except weaker, lighter, and less mobile in most ways, absolutely toy with professional athletes of all sizes who beat me regularly. To anyone who dares to argue that movement and sports are not complex, I ask you to do one thing. Program a robot not to surf, not to climb, and certainly not to grapple, just to walk. By yourself, from scratch. I'll wait. Why are nerds bad at sports? Because thinking about doing something and studying it is taxing to a non-negligible degree and generally far less productive than actually doing that thing. The people who do well in sports at a local level are the people who don't stop to ask questions and overanalyze or second guess themselves. It's the people who show up and do the work. Of course, at a high level, you start to see that there are more and more people who do the work and study the work, like me. But what you don't see is people at a high level who just work smart. While there are some in many sports who succeed despite little work, they are not, as Tim Ferriss would have you believe, brilliant paradigm shifters who are working smarter, not harder. They're one of two things. A, freaks of statistical and/or genetic luck, or B, hard workers who are pretending. I am not, was not, and will never advocate for blindly applying hard work to anything. Working smart is important, but just trying to work smart and do little actual work at all in any craft you want to be good at is a fool's gambit. So why is Tim Ferriss a fraud? Remember how nerds who don't practice are bad at sports? Well, wouldn't you know, Tim isn't bad at sports or movement. He was an All-American in high school wrestling, gold medalist in Chinese kickboxing, world champion in tango, and while he's not great at breakdancing, he can certainly do it. Does this look like someone who is working smarter, not harder to you? I'll tell you what it looks like to me. Someone who has worked so hard that he was practicing wrestling in his sleep to develop one skill set, and then he put in the work in a related skill set, judo, and put some serious work into kickboxing as well. Then he put in more work to study the rule book and found a way to leverage his previously developed skill sets, then more work, study, and risk of death to cut 30 pounds in an organization where his competitors weren't cutting weight at all, and then won a competition that frankly wasn't extremely competitive. Does that sound like working smarter, not harder, and Pareto's principle to you? Because it sounds like working smarter and harder to me. Tim also speaks a number of languages, and he measures how long it takes him to learn a language in months, which is awesome. But I guarantee the number of hours he puts into learning those languages, especially the first ones he learned, are similar to anyone who learns a language in 3 to 5 years. They've just been compressed into 3 to 9 months. When I first saw Ido Portal's work, I was still very much into the Tim Ferriss mindset. I was amazed at the progress his students would make in just a few months. You know what the secret is? We put more work into 3 months than most people do in 5 years. And we work smarter. It does not work with just the smarter part. Believe me, I have tried it for myself. I have tried it with so many corporate clients over the years. The magic is not the smartness of the method, it's the work. 2 years after I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I heard of a Jiu-Jitsu prodigy who at 16 became the youngest athlete to ever compete in ADCC, and at 17 strangled the black belt and professional fighter Masakazu Imanari, who literally has a move named after him. The most interesting part of the story was that Nikki did this after just 3 years of training with the jiu-jitsu genius John Danaher. Pop quiz. How much do you think that Nikki was training for those 3 years? A, 2 to 3 times a month. B, a more moderate, 2 to 3 times a week. Or C, 2 to 3 times per day. Do I really need to tell you at this point? 2 to 3 times a day, training with the greatest jiu-jitsu teacher and team on the planet. I hate to beat a dead horse, But Tim also tried jiu-jitsu for his TV show. He went to one of the best jiu-jitsu academies in the world and attempted to learn as much BJJ as he could in 5 days. There's an important nugget here that Tim knows very well. If you want to get good at anything quickly, one of the best things that you can do is to find and hire the best teachers you possibly can. On that note, now is a great time for MJ Wolf to introduce to you the sponsor of this video.
He's one of the greatest movement teachers in the world, holder of 2 unbroken Massachusetts state powerlifting records, a dual degree in biochemistry and biology from Brandeis University. He's rapidly growing a following of badass movers on YouTube. It's Bren Vezi. How do you say that?
Okay, it's me. If you want to learn how to move better and not fall into the trap of cheap hacks and shortcuts, and learn to do the stuff that really works, fill out a form at our website and I'll be happy to help you in any way I can. Now, back to Tim Ferriss learning jiu-jitsu. So Tim's at one of the best BJJ academies in the world. Check. He has personal attention from some extremely high-level guys. One of them is a black belt in jiu-jitsu under Marcelo Garcia and wrote the book on the art of learning. Tim also has previous high-level experience in wrestling and judo. He's even done judo intensively when he was at a boarding school in Japan. Check. They do a before test, and Tim goes against a real competitor, and of course he gets crushed. But they make it hard to tell with the editing. It's funny for all you bulletproofing enthusiasts. Even Tim talks about how you can't avoid injury with real training. But you know how much progress Tim makes training every day, probably multiple sessions a day, with all this personal instruction from these incredibly high-level teachers? So little that they cannot repeat the before test of actual sparring and switch to a gimme test where he can just show off that, yes, he did learn a move in 1 week of hard training. The point is not to rag on Tim. He did good work. The point is, to what degree can you beat other people's hard work by working smarter? And the answer, I promise you, is not that much. Unless you figured out something that no one else knows yet, but how will you figure that out unless you do the work? How will you test it and refine it if you aren't doing the work? No. The answer is, for anything you care about, to learn the things that others don't know yet or haven't utilized properly, then apply, build, refine, and tinker with them at a pace that others can't or won't keep up with. If you want to see an example of that, watch this video where I show you the biggest mistake the jiu-jitsu community is making and how to fix it. Subscribe.